What if I told you that Paul McCartney, one of the most iconic figures in music history, almost walked away from the Beatles? It's a shocking thought, right? But it almost happened. Today, let's dive into the untold story of how Paul McCartney almost left the Beatles. Back in the early 60s, the Beatles were taking the world by storm. John, Paul, George, and Ringo were on fire. But, like any band, they weren't immune to personal struggles. As the Beatles' success grew, so did their creative differences. While the public saw four friends making magic, behind the scenes, things were starting to change. By 1967, the Beatles were becoming legends, but with fame came pressure, and the band's dynamics started to shift. John was heavily influenced by Yoko Ono. George was exploring spirituality, and Ringo felt sidelined. But Paul was struggling with something more, the direction of the band. Paul had always been the go-getter, pushing the band to be better. But by the time they were recording the White Album, tensions between him and the other members started to grow. They didn't always see eye to eye, especially when it came to music. Things hit a boiling point during the Let It Be recording sessions in 1969. The atmosphere in the studio was tense, with each member going off on their own. Paul, who had always been the driving force in the band's music, was frustrated. The band was falling apart, and he could feel it. He started to think, is this it? Is this where it all ends? Paul was no stranger to conflict. He had often clashed with John, but now it was different. The tension felt personal, like they weren't just disagreeing over music, they were disagreeing over who they were as people. Paul's breaking point came during one particular argument. According to Paul, it wasn't just about music anymore. It was about trust, respect, and whether or not they could keep working together. At that moment, Paul seriously considered leaving. He felt like the band was no longer the place he once loved. In fact, there were talks behind closed doors about him leaving, and some of his closest friends thought he was done with the Beatles. But Paul didn't quit, not yet. One thing that weighed heavily on Paul during this time was his perceived role as the leader of the Beatles. While John was the voice of rebellion and George had his own spiritual journey, Paul was often seen as the one trying to hold everything together. This pressure took its toll on him. He was exhausted, physically and mentally. He had been the one to push the band forward, but now it felt like he was carrying the weight alone. In many ways, he felt isolated. In 1970, after the Let It Be sessions ended, Paul had had enough. The final straw came when he felt like his contributions were being overlooked. He was still passionate about the Beatles, but he couldn't shake the feeling that his voice wasn't being heard. As he watched John and Yoko's close relationship take center stage, Paul felt even more disconnected. He realized that he wasn't part of the close-knit group that had once created magic together. That was when Paul decided to leave the Beatles. It wasn't something he announced publicly right away, but internally he knew it was over. He wanted out. On April 10th, 1970, Paul made the decision to announce that he was leaving the Beatles. It wasn't a huge public spectacle, but it shocked the world. People were devastated. The Beatles were breaking up, and the band that had changed the music scene forever was no more. In his official statement, Paul said he was leaving for personal reasons. It wasn't just a career decision. It was about his happiness and his future. After leaving the Beatles, Paul went on to form a new band, Wings, and pursue a solo career. His departure didn't mark the end of his music career, but it did mark the end of an era. The remaining Beatles, John, George, and Ringo, also went on their separate ways, but none of them could recapture the magic they once shared. It was the end of the greatest band in history. In the years that followed, Paul and the other Beatles would reconcile, but things were never the same. Paul's departure from the Beatles is often seen as a sad chapter in their history, but it also showed just how deeply the band had been affected by the pressures of fame, creativity, and personal differences. Looking back, it's hard to imagine the Beatles without Paul McCartney. His unique talents, his energy, and his drive helped shape the sound that changed the world. But there was a time when it almost didn't happen. Paul almost walked away from it all. That's the untold story. Paul McCartney, the man who almost left the Beatles. But in the end, he stayed. And thanks to that, we got some of the best music ever created. What do you think about Paul almost leaving the Beatles? Do you think the band could have survived without him? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more amazing stories from the world of music.